Okay, so it's been a little while since I've recorded a video doing any kind of game analysis recently, but I just played a pretty interesting game in a slow tournament, time control of a game in 90 plus 30 seconds increment, and well, this game was, yeah, it was very fun to play. It had a lot of interesting moments, so I just sat down and analyzed it, and going to make a video about it. So I was black. My opponent is a master strength player, rated about 2300, and he plays d4. And I kind of expected going into the game that he would play d4. And I was planning to play King's Indian, so knight f6. So okay, we got pretty much the main line: c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6. This is the main line of the King's Indian. And I have to confess that before the game, I really, the King's Indian is not my main opening repertoire. Really, it's not my main opening for black against d4. So I was, I had a few ideas of what I would be playing in the main line, but I mostly just was planning to improvise on the spot. Which, okay, it's a bit of a risky decision if you're playing an opening as sharp as the King's Indian, but you're always guaranteed an interesting game, pretty much. So we definitely got an interesting game as a result of this. So there's a lot of different ways that white can play against the King's Indian. Of course, there's just the main line, which is classical development with knight f3 and the bishop e2, and the white is just going to get castled and say, I have my pawn in the center, my pawn center, and it's up to black to strike in the center somehow, either e5 or c5. There's also the same-ish variation with f3, where white is going to build this kind of battery and then aim to play bishop h6. There's also what my opponent played here. Well, it's also the four pawns attack, f4. And there's also the line that my opponent played, which is h3. Now, this is not actually very common. I think it's only the fifth most popular move for white in the database. But the system does have a name. It's called the Karpov system. And actually, white is not right away developing this knight on f3. White has a very ambitious goal in mind, which is to play g4, which is going to clamp down on black's f5 break. Very often black ends up wanting to play f5. So white wants to play g4, and then put this knight not on f3, but actually from e2 and into g3. And from there, this knight will do a really good job of stopping the f5 break. And even later on, white can continue with g5, and this knight on g3 is also perfectly placed to take away the h5 square from this knight on f6. So, kind of just one move, h3, has a lot of very deep ideas behind it. And also, it prepares a nice spot for this bishop on e3, where white doesn't have to worry about any kind of knight g4. So I knew this was a line, h3, but I did not really know any specifics as far as like what the precise move order for black should be here. But okay, I figured castles has to be a reasonable enough move, and that is the main line here for black, is to castle. Now my opponent plays bishop e3. Actually here, black has quite a range of possible moves. The move that I played in the game is e5, which I would say it's kind of the old main line. And I think it's the most principled move. We just strike in the center. We've castled, we've developed our king side, so now it's time to play e5 on kind of traditional style. c5 has also been kind of fashionable lately, and I think the idea is after d takes a5, black will play queen a5, and this actually results in quite good counterplay for black. So usually white does not actually take on c5, usually white I think plays d5. And this is just a different way of playing. Now black will probably be playing for a6 and b5, and kind of resembles a Benoni kind of position. And then there's also kind of other more exotic moves, like knight c6 has been played, which is very provocative, kind of encouraging d5 when the knight is going to start hopping around. Knight bd7 also, preparing either e5 or c5, just kind of staying flexible. But okay, I thought there's nothing wrong with e5. This is the most principled move. We're playing in traditional King's Indian fashion, where we finally have to strike against white's center. So white, he plays d5. And this is really the only kind of testing move for white. To make this system work, I mean, white is spending a lot of time on a move like h3, and then white also wants to play g4 and do this kind of very awkward maneuvering with his knight to get this ideal setup that he wants. So white cannot really afford to have the center be opened up with e takes d4, and then black will bring rook to e8, and very quickly black will be getting sufficient counterplay on the e file. So that's why white has to play d5 here. And okay, now here is where I kind of really started thinking, or at least I don't have automatic moves I can make anymore. I've already castled, I've played e5. So, how should black approach this position? So, I would say there's kind of two main ways black can try to play this position. We know generally what white wants to do. White wants to achieve this kind of setup with g4 and then putting the knight on g3. So one thing that black can do is try to open up the queen side very quickly. Try to play for c6, possibly maneuver this knight to c5, and then once the queen side is opened up, then retreat this knight either maybe to d7 or e8, and then just play for f5. Even with this pawn on g4, just basically go for broke. Try to open up the position on all fronts. Play c6 and play f5, and try to take advantage of the fact that white is going to be making a lot of slow developing moves. This is a very time-consuming setup to get going here. And the king is going to be staying in the center, so it makes sense for black to try and open things up. The other way of playing is the way that I ended up choosing. So I didn't really know in advance what the quote-unquote best continuation is here for black. And so I just kind of was taking it more move by move at this point, and I played a5. Now after analyzing this after the game, I think that, although this is actually the most common move, I actually think that it is more precise to play with knight a6 instead. So this actually is also the engine's preference to play knight a6, and the idea is we're not even going to bother playing a5. We're just going to put the knight on c5 very quickly, right away, to attack this pawn on e4 before white is able to get both g3 and this knight, or both g4 and this knight on g3. So for example here, if white plays g4, now after knight c5, white is not in time to get this knight all the way in one go to g3 to defend this pawn, which means he has to resort to something ugly like f3. And now white is really kind of spending a lot of time making pawn moves here, so it makes perfect sense now to play c6. And for example, after knight ge2, now white's going to continue his maneuver, knight g3, but now white, or black, is perfectly ready to start opening things up. We can take a d5, and then play knight e8. And now the position is, still complex. White still has his chances, but black is already ready to play f5. We also want to play queen h4 and maybe bishop h6 to trade off this dark square bishop. So it would be strategically quite good for black. And okay, it's not like black is winning. It's not like white is winning. White still the engine still prefers white a little bit here, but not by that much. So yeah, I mean, in my head, I wasn't really thinking too much about this idea of c6 because I didn't really think it would help me that much to open up the c file. But no, actually, yeah, this is the right approach. And then we want to play knight e8 and play for f5. But importantly, we want to do this before it, because we play knight a6. The tempi kind of work out very nicely for black, where white is forced to play this move f3 if he wants to still maintain his setup here. So the way the game happened, I played a5, which is a useful prophylactic move. We are restricting white's queenside, and we're anyway going to get this knight to c5. But now white is in time to get his desired setup. So he plays g4, knight a6, knight ge2, and of course none of this was unexpected. And now if I play knight c5, white will be very happy to play knight g3. And here I started kind of thinking, I'm not quite sure I like where this could be headed, because I can't really, I'm not really sure I can play for f5 so easily anymore. White, if I play knight e8, for example, I'm not even sure I'm threatening to play f5, because white will be very happy to take everything there. In the end, my bishop will have to get traded off for this knight. The g file will open up, and I thought that would be a little bit too dangerous. So I didn't actually play knight c5 here. Here I actually had my longest think of the game already in the opening. I mean, ideally, if I was playing the King's Indian as part of my repertoire, I would, already know what to do in the opening and know what the best plans were. But okay, sometimes it's kind of fun to experiment and play an opening that you don't usually play, just to kind of see how well you can figure things out on your own. And I actually came up with a very interesting plan here, which is not so bad. The engine does not hate this plan, which I think is saying something, because the engine usually prefers white in all of these King's Indian positions anyway. And yeah, the idea is not having anything to do with c6 or with f5 or with getting this knight anywhere right now. I'm going to play the first move here, and I played knight e8. Okay, so at first it's not really clear what black is trying to do. It looks like black is trying to play f5, but actually that's not the idea at all. We don't want to play f5. So my opponent, just played a very natural move, knight g3. Yeah, I mean, here the engine still wants to go for this idea of c6, but it's going to be a little bit less effective now after knight g3. Just this one extra tempo of having the pawn on a5, when black could have had, instead of this pawn back on a7 and this knight already on e8, and having forced this pawn to f3 also from white. So these are kind of very important subtleties to just make this slightly less preferable for black. So this is definitely a much improved version from what we could have gotten earlier. So earlier, the position would have looked something like this, where you can see like we've already forced this pawn to f3, and we are, the fact that we didn't waste this move on a5 is really helping black a lot here. So, okay, after knight e8, well, okay, knight e8, it's not clear what exactly black's idea is, but okay, we'll see. Plays knight g3. And okay, now I played my next move, and yeah, my opponent was visibly quite surprised. He kind of stared at the move and with a confused expression on his face. And it took a little while before he actually wrote the move down on his score sheet. And the move is bishop f6. Okay. Of course, it looks like we're trying to prepare bishop to g5, but white can easily stop that with queen d2. But the real point, believe it or not, is to put this bishop on h4. So this is actually a valid idea. I have seen this idea before in other variations of the King's Indian, I don't think in this exact line or this exact position, but I am familiar with this bishop f6 to h4 idea. After the game, my opponent told me he had never seen this idea before in his life, and he's been playing chess for a while. So I guess, yeah, this is a very unusual kind of development for black. But actually, the point is we are stalling these pawns on the king side. We're not really allowing white to. If we go back and move, like if black does nothing, then white is actually already getting ready to play h4, and then continue with h5, or g5 and then h5, and just get these pawns moving. If white can do this and then open up the h file, get this rook into play, then things can go downhill very quickly for black after queen d2 and bishop h6. If the king side opens up like that, then black can get into a lot of trouble. So bishop f6 and bishop h4 is actually kind of a prophylactic idea to freeze these pawns here. And because of the way white has developed his pieces in this kind of non-standard fashion, the knight here usually would be on f3, which of course would control the square. But because the knight is on g3, it's doing a great job of stopping f5, but it's doing a terrible job at pretty much everything else. So this bishop can sit here on h4 kind of with impunity, and it's almost impossible to dislodge it without resorting to some extremely lengthy maneuvers that are just going to take too much time. Something like that, for instance. So, okay, well, so the game continues. He plays rook g1. Very reasonable move. Creating an x right here. Possibly there's some knight f5 or h5 jumps looming. But it's not actually a real threat yet. So I continue improving my position, knight c5. And the engine approves of this move also. I kind of correctly judged that my opponent doesn't have any real threats. You could also play king h8, but it's not really that necessary. And actually, it's not clear that this king is really well placed in case white plays f4 later. And if this diagonal opens up, I might prefer to actually have my king on g8 anyway. So, okay. So I play knight c5. And yeah, now this gives white an opportunity to go for quite a tempting continuation, which my opponent really could not resist. Played bishop h6, attacking the rook. It's actually not really so much of a threat to take this rook. The idea is more to control the g7 square, so that now white can consider a move like knight f5, a kind of typical sacrifice to open up the g file, and the bishop is controlling the g7 square. So, like for example here, if I just ignored this, I'm not really sure white will be so happy to take this rook. I could even throw in a move like bishop g5 first, and then recapture here. And this dark square bishop is easily white's most valuable minor piece, so if we get to trade it off for a rook, then I'll have full control of the dark squares for the rest of the game here, pretty much. And this is pretty good compensation. But the reason I didn't want to play like this is because I thought white doesn't have to take my rook, so white can just, for instance, castle. And I mean, yeah, I don't really have anything better to do there than to play knight g7. So I played knight g7 right away. And yeah, now this is what my opponent was going for. Played knight to f5. So it looks very tempting, but it turns out not really to be so powerful. And the engine is not really impressed with this at all for white. The engine just wants to castle instead. And maybe now black can consider a move like f6 to prepare bishop g5. So the game continues, still a pretty complex position. But okay, he plays knight f5, which it looks very attractive. Because obviously if I take with a pawn, then this is just lights out. It's attacking my knight, and if I defend it, then bishop takes g7 and queen h6 is game over on the spot. I have no way of defending the bishop, and I get checkmated. So, okay, I can't take the knight with a pawn. But I have to take the knight somehow, because this is threatened. If I move the knight, then he can still take my rook, and also he can take my bishop. So yeah, this knight has to go. I actually did consider bishop f6. This was one line I analyzed, and I was not really too concerned about this mass trade. I thought if we do this, we trade off the dark square bishops, and still, black is going to be happy here. So I have, still plenty of weak dark squares that I can hope to control. But I was actually worried about g5. And this leads to a very bizarre position. After knight takes f5, so it's kind of a long tactical sequence here. He can't really take this because I'm going to take on h6 and take on f6, stopping the checkmate and an extra pawn, so it should be very good for black. But okay, he takes on f5, and now I have to play bishop g7. If I go here, well, obviously he can take my rook and play f6 and just entomb this bishop forever. So I have to play bishop g7. And then he plays f6. And I really wasn't sure how to evaluate this position. I thought that, I knew black is not in any immediate danger. I mean, if white ever tries to play h4 and h5, I will play, like for example here, if I plays h4, I can play the very typical maneuver of h5 myself, and then put the king on h7 to kind of block this all up. But even so, I wasn't completely, I mean, even here, maybe this line continues. Maybe white can play h5, and it's not so simple for black, actually. So, I wasn't actually, here, I guess we could take on f6, so I can't really do that. But even here, like, there's always this kind of long-term idea to play bishop e2 and queen d1 and sacrifice a piece here on h5 to open things up. I just thought this position would be too tricky to handle with black. With the kingside being this locked up and white having this massive wedge on f6. The engine is not really that concerned about this, but still slightly prefers white. But yeah, I decided there's no need to kind of go into that. So I played knight takes f5. Now, admittedly, I didn't really consider the engine's top choice, which is bishop takes f5. In my mind, I thought I have to get rid of this knight. This knight on g7 is probably my worst minor piece. This bishop one day I'm hoping can be good. White has a lot of pawns on light squares that hopefully this bishop can target. If one day I get to play f5, then this bishop will come to life. But yeah, the engine actually wants to play bishop takes f5, which is kind of interesting. After g takes f5, it plays king h8. So I definitely did not consider this idea. But the point is to play rook g8, and then we'll be threatening to take on f5. So we're going to try and encourage white to release the tension and take on g6 himself. So if white ever does take on g6, now the idea is that f file has been opened up again, and this kind of position is definitely going to be quite pleasant for black. Now f2 is a target, and we can bring this knight into h5 and f4. Something like this would be very, very good for black indeed. So this was the engine's preferred way of playing. Knight takes f5 is not so bad though. Still definitely playable. It just kind of leads to a different position. And okay, white takes with the g pawn. Important to point out, white cannot try to win material with bishop takes f8 because knight d4 just wins on the spot. Threatening knight f3 check, saving the knight, and still threatening the bishop. And if you play queen h6, I can take on f8, and the bishop is immune because of knight f3 check. Take the bishop, knight f3 check, wins the queen. So this does not work for white. So I play g takes f5. And now, yeah, I mean, it is actually, you know, it is feasible to maybe consider sacrificing the exchange, but it's not necessary. So I just play rook e8. So after the smoke clears, this, you know, this resulting position is not really like a problem for black. It's still quite playable for black, but white's not really in any trouble either. It's just kind of a tricky double-edged position. There's a lot of stuff going on. Obviously, white has this open g file and this pawn on f5. But at the same time, white doesn't really want to take this unnecessarily, because that will kind of lead to a similar position we've had before. It opens up the f file, and black can try to slowly play to force white into making a decision here. So obviously, right now I can't take because of the pin. And even after king h8, I won't be threatening to take because of bishop g7 check, and then there'll be all sorts of discoveries. But like black can slowly prepare, you know, king h8, rook g8, once the rooks are connected, and slowly try to threaten to take on f5 and force white to release the tension by taking on g6. So that's kind of like what the whole middle game revolved around, is this tension on f5 and g6. The queen side is not really a major battleground at the moment. c6 is not really a viable plan anymore because white will be very happy to put a rook on d1. And if I ever take on d5, white can take back, because I'm just taking back with a knight, or at the very least with a piece, to make a target out of this pawn d6. And I mean, playing for b5 is not really feasible either, because white has too many protectors on it. So, okay, so yeah, this is kind of the main battleground. Okay, so my opponent castles, and I play king h8. And right here, I started getting more confident because my opponent started thinking a lot and kind of playing moves that I wasn't really too impressed by. But okay, these moves are fine. He plays bishop e2, which is just perfectly normal move, getting the bishop off the back rank. And he ended up playing bishop d3 later, so it might be worth considering bishop d3 right away, although it's really not clear. It's hard to make a decision between these two because you can also argue that this bishop shouldn't be traded off so easily for a knight like that. If we lose this bishop, then a lot of these light squared pawns will become targets later on. So yeah, bishop e2 I think is very sensible. And okay, just play bishop d7, continuing my development. And yeah, now here I really thought that white should just take on g6. I thought that there's really like no... I didn't really think that white would be able to hold on to this tension long term. Because if I am ever able to take this and force white to end up with a pawn here on f5, that's just going to be a permanent weakness, and if I can cover the g file, then if you just have a weak pawn on f5, black is going to be clearly better, I thought. And I didn't really think this was so bad for white. I thought you could take, and then maybe slowly prepare this f4 move, which is going to open up this diagonal, try to open up my king. It's kind of a weird position because, I mean, white cannot really attack my king so easily, but at the same time, if I ever move this bishop off of h4, then white can play h4 as a pawn grab. If I take it, like for example here, if I ever take this pawn on h3, the bishop takes h3, white is happy to lose that pawn because then he'll switch over to the h file, and this is going to be way too dangerous. He'll double rooks on the open h file, h7 will be a pretty big target, and it's not something I can allow. So, you know, my whole strategy is predicated on having this bishop on h4, just kind of sitting there on the sidelines, stopping white from opening up the h file. So yeah, it's a very unusual way of playing the King's Indian, but you know, it does work in this case. I guess I should also point out that g2, I of course cannot afford to take this guy because, yeah, I think this is pretty clear cut. White will not take, and play bishop g5. And the only square available for my queen is d7, but now bishop g4 is a pretty nasty double attack. Attacks my queen and attacks the bishop. If I play queen f7, then something like rook to d1 like I didn't really analyze this any further. This is just, you know, what looks a little ridiculous to allow this pin. So okay, so yeah, I play bishop d7, and yeah, so instead of taking on g6, he plays rook g4, which is quite interesting. It's not the engine's preferred plan, but I don't think it's not a bad plan at all. He's trying to double rooks, and you're going to make it as hard as possible for me to release the tension by taking on 5, by having this massive pressure on g5. I mean, moreover, I was a little bit concerned about this exchange sacrifice now. So both of these dark square bishops are so valuable that either side is actually perfectly willing to give up a rook for one of these bishops. And I was a little bit concerned about allowing rook takes h4. So for example, the move I wanted to play was rook g8, but I was a little bit worried about this. And bishop g5, and this bishop arrives on f6. So it's really not an exchange sacrifice at all, because I'll be forced to play rook g7, and white can win the exchange back at his leisure. I can pronounce words properly. So yeah, I mean, if I take n f2, admittedly, I didn't really consider this seriously. Like, I kind of just stopped analyzing here and said I don't want to allow this. I mean, the engine does not really see any checkmate. If you play queen h6, I can just defend with rook to g8. It admittedly looks very ugly. Like, you have to find some only moves. For example, after rook f1, I mean, the queen is almost trapped. So like, I can go to g2, but no queen e3. Threatening rook g1. And the queen is going to be running really short on squares to arrive on h2. I mean, this is just, it's really difficult. Like, to show you how quickly it can go wrong, actually, yeah, if I play a4, I think white is already winning after this, and then there's a nice tactical blow here, rook takes g6. This is pinned, and if you take, then just queen h6. So yeah, I mean, I would have to play rook a to g8, which is quite ugly. And then, I mean, white can continue with h4, so it's not really clear how black should proceed in this position. The engine confidently plays bishop e8. It says black is fine. He's preparing knight d7. But okay, for a human, it's kind of very difficult to play this way, so I don't really... yeah, I mean, the engine just plays rook g8 and says this is fine for black, but yeah, I think bishop f6 is much more natural. So, however, this does turn out to lose a very important tempo. Because now white is kind of able to stabilize. So he plays rook to g1. And now I have to be careful that white doesn't actually take on g6. Because there, yeah, this kind of exchange sacrifice, if I play, like, I don't know, some random move a4, and maybe white can take this. If I take on g4, then white can take on f7. And white will be getting this rook back. Of this rook left on the open h file, or open g file. So okay, I probably wouldn't be able to take, I'd have to go here. But then, yeah, maybe now, or, well, the rook is still hanging. Yeah, I mean, so okay, maybe this is not anything to really worry about. I didn't really analyze this particular line with the engine. I just played queen e7 instead. Yeah, so I thought here I'm just stopping this outright, because now, after this, if you take on f7, I can simply take back. And this is actually still a playable exchange sacrifice. I think the engine was talking about this or something, and then somehow using the h file. So kind of an interesting idea, but not very obvious. So instead, he played bishop d3, which actually is the engine's first choice. Yeah. So I mean, this kind of exchange sacrifice is not this playable for white, but it's a little bit too speculative. So yeah, this is my opponent's longest link of the game, bishop d3, and it's the best move. So he kind of realizes that he needs to keep this under control. He needs to keep the f5 score under control. And I still cannot take this because of bishop g7 check. This is what I thought? Yeah. No, hold on. Why can't I take this? There was a reason. I think I just didn't like this, that I don't have a great follow-up. Because I can't play e4. If I could play e4, then I would want to, but you can take with a knight. It just has enough defenders on that. So, yeah, I didn't want to do that just yet. So I played rook g8. And now here, my opponent should definitely save this bishop, play bishop c2, and not allow me any chance of taking this. Instead he plays f3. So it's kind of a slightly inaccurate move. It's a move he wants to make. He's bolstering the e4 square. But this is kind of a subtle point. He actually doesn't want to let me trade this knight off c5. So because all the action is happening over here on the king side, the only real benefit to having this knight on c5 is that if I ever do take on f5, it can help force through this move e4, which would be kind of a good way to open up this diagonal and get some counterplay. But it never really works because white just is controlling that square too much. So, otherwise the knight is just kind of sitting here out for lunch. Just like this knight on c3 is really sitting here. This is a spectator. This knight is not doing anything. No real battles over here. So, for that reason, bishop c2, I thought would give white a clear advantage, and the engine agrees. And black actually kind of struggles to find a constructive flank here. It's not easy to make moves here for black. c6 doesn't really do anything because you don't want to take on d5 and allow this knight here. You could try to prepare b5, but that's going to be dicey. You're going to have to, maybe play rook b8 and play b5. You're going to have to end up trading off this light square bishop, and also disconnecting your rooks from the g file. And this could open up at any moment if white wants to. So, yeah, it's a dicey position. The engine kind of just plays a4, just plays it move by move, but it's not so easy to play black here. But after f3, I have some hope. So I took this bishop. Here this is my second longest think of the game. My longest think was in the opening when I was coming up with this knight e8 plan and then putting the bishop on h4. And yet here I kind of realized it was a critical moment. And if I allow bishop c2, then I get stuck in that kind of passive position. So yeah, I took my chance now. I take this. And now I come up with a very interesting idea, which this is what I was thinking about earlier. For the second time I put my bishop back on h4. So I actually have a surprising idea in mind here. I actually want to play g5. And then all of a sudden, this bishop on h6 is kind of amusingly trapped. So if white does nothing, like he plays a3, some random move, then after g5, I actually want to just win this bishop, queen f6, and take this guy. So it's a little bit more complicated than that because white can sacrifice the exchange. In fact, I thought first I could play like queen d2 to attack this pawn again. So I'd have to play f6, and now white can sacrifice the exchange. And I'm not really sure how to evaluate this position. White can maybe play rook g4 here. And yeah, I am up the exchange, but the only open file is pretty well shut down by white, and this is really anybody's game. The knight is not really inferior to either of these rooks in this closed position. So okay, this would have been interesting. But at the very least, I'd rather prefer an interesting position than one where I have no counterplay, so I was going to go for g5. But I thought my opponent could play queen d2, which is indeed, this is the engine's top choice, queen d2. And this obviously stops g5, because now white can just take that. But it also kind of deviously prevents g takes f5, because now white can take everything on g8. At the end of the day, queen g2 check is a very nasty blow. This is actually a checkmate on g7. So yeah, I realized he can play queen d2, and then my idea was to play queen f6. I was hoping to make this work, but I'm now forcing some decision to be made here on the f5 square. And if I could move again, I would be very happy to take on f5, since I'll be covering the g7 square at the end of that variation with my queen. But yeah, unfortunately here, actually, rook takes h4. This is kind of what I saw after the game analysis. This would not be very good at all. After bishop g5 and bishop f6 check, at the end of this variation, white plays f4. Now this is quite a powerful attack. This is not something I wanted to allow. Kind of similar to the other line I looked at earlier, where I avoided this rook takes h4 exchange sack. Here I don't want to allow the same thing. Because yeah, now if I take this, then I'm just asking for trouble on this open diagonal. But at the same time, white is threatening to take this, so I can't take this because it opens up the g file. So yeah, this is dicey. Maybe even winning for white. So yeah, I would have had to kind of admit defeat and go back with my bishop to f6. This is actually the best move. And now white can continue with queen g2, tripling up here, and just make it impossible for me to ever take this, because the rook on g8 hangs. Yeah, and here I would have had to think a lot for a different plan, hopefully I would have eventually found bishop g7, which is really the only it's the only good continuation for black now. Just kind of kick this bishop out. And white will play bishop e3, and the game continues. I maybe can play like something really cagey, like queen f8, to prepare to take on f5 by having this sufficiently defended. And then, yeah, I mean, the position will remain quite complicated, and white is still for choice, I think. But anyway, that did not happen, because, yeah, my opponent was, again, very tempted, and this time he did play rook takes h4. So, this I had calculated, so I thought this would be okay for me. So queen takes h4. I actually should point out here, I did think about this seemingly ridiculous move, g takes f5. So I mean, he took my bishop, and instead of taking, taking back his rook, I take on f5. And the point of this line is actually that this rook and bishop kind of amusingly get trapped. I mean, after rook h5, I play f4. I've never seen this kind of box before for pieces. But yeah, this rook on h5 and this bishop on h6 are both shut out of the game. And I actually could like consider playing rook g1 and starting some kind of weird attack on the white king on the open g file, and maybe picking up these pieces slowly, like queen here, queen here. I mean, this does not work for, but like white can play accurately to make sure that he stays okay here, and eventually like sacrifice some material back to get his pieces out. But okay, this would be interesting for sure. So I just played queen takes h4. This is what I had calculated in advance. Bishop g5, queen takes h3, and bishop f6, rook g7. Yeah, so this is all forced. Yeah, and here I didn't really see any way for white to seriously hurt me. I thought that I mean, maybe he could play queen e3, because my plan to get out of this bind was actually to play queen h6, I thought, and then I could play g5, just force white to resolve this pin, or yeah, play rook to g8, queen h6 with the idea of taking on f5 and forcing white to resolve the pin that way. But actually, yeah, white has a very tricky move here that I definitely underestimated. So in the game, this is kind of the turning point in the game where my opponent really starts to go wrong. He plays knight d1 here, which definitely is not a good move. I mean, he's trying to get a knight into the action here, but it's just too slow. What he should have done was c5. This definitely was something I had underestimated from far away. And probably I would have reacted the same way I did in the game. I would have played queen h6 check, and probably this. So threatening to take on f5. Yeah, or maybe g5. Yeah, g5 was my original idea, actually. I'd only considered this like a little bit later. But yeah, but actually here, white will take back the exchange and play queen c4. So this is something the engine is showing me here. And it's actually very difficult for me to keep the queen side under control, because my queen is like badly misplaced here, and white is all ready to even play c6 and start to drum up some very serious threats here, or at least crash through. So, I mean, the engine still finds some way to hold, like apparently queen h2 is one of the only moves. And after rook c1, now apparently queen f2 is the only move. So I mean, this would be a little bit difficult to find, I think, but I mean, the engine is claiming that black is holding on. But okay, I mean, white definitely has compensation for a pawn here. Black is still up a pawn, but white has a lot of threats over here. You know, I can consider playing c6. And if I take twice, then this bishop will have to retreat to some awful square. And white can play knight d5, attack c7. And this is getting knight d5 also with ideas of f6 check to really construct some kind of mating net around this king. And this is a really dicey position for sure. So that would have been the kind of consistent approach. That would have justified white's exchange sacrifice. Yeah, so he plays knight d1. So after this, black should be fully in control. I mean, the game still had some adventures later, as we'll see, but I kind of felt like this move was wrong. So yeah, now I play queen h6 check, king d1, and rook a8, very important move. So this is much better than g5, because here, after rook a8, I'm actually going to force the position to open up for my bishop. I'm actually threatening to take on f5 and resolve the tension this way. And then if white were, like for example, plays a random move a3, then I'll take on f5, threatening bishop on f6. And white pretty much has no choice but to liquidate here. And okay, I mean, here if you also trade rooks, then this resulting position should just be an easy win for black, because I have a strong bishop. This pawn is still weak. I have a passed pawn over here. I have extra pawn, so I mean, this is just going to be winning for black. So okay, here he kind of realized that things had gone wrong, and there's really no way to kind of save this. I think he has to play like, I think he just needs to take on g7 and kind of play knight e3 and hope for the best. But he plays a very tricky move f4, so this actually was not something that I had anticipated from before. But this actually does, actually this move loses on the spot, but it's not obvious how it loses on the spot. So okay, I calculated a little bit here. Now the first move I looked at was to take on f5 anyway, and the reason I rejected this was actually kind of silly. So he takes on e5, and I thought, okay, now queen takes f6 actually is actually winning for black, so I'll come back to that. But what I analyzed was this, and okay, I mean obviously if you just take here and everything, then this is still completely fine for me, because now I mean we basically get the same kind of position as before. My bishop is going to be much better than the knight. This pawn is still weak. I have an extra pawn, this outside passed pawn, so I mean this should be winning for black easily. But no, what I was actually kind of worried about was this. And like white actually sacrificing the exchange properly. After f6, takes g7, and bishop takes c7. This is kind of ridiculous, but somehow I convinced myself that white's pawns here were a little bit dangerous. I mean, obviously black is completely winning here, but even if you play queen g6, it's much stronger to keep the queens on the board and play like queen g1 or something. But even this, just going into the endgame, this is just winning for black. These pawns are not dangerous at all. Kind of in my head, I was hallucinating that somehow this knight gets to c5. If this knight gets to c5, then like, okay, does this pawn go through? If I trade the bishop off for this knight, then does this pawn go through? But in reality, this is not anything. There's nothing here for white. This pawn is very fast. The rook is more than capable of handling this position, so I mean, the king can always come back over here to help defend if necessary. This is just completely winning for white. So kind of a gross misevaluation of this endgame. Really overestimating my opponent's chances there. But actually, this is also completely winning. Queen takes f6. This is like even more winning than the other variation. And had I maybe looked at this for a little bit more time, I maybe would have appreciated this. I considered this for like half a second, but didn't really analyze it deeply. But actually, like, white is completely paralyzed here, so I didn't really properly appreciate just how like crushing this is for black. But yeah, the threat is to actually play f4, and then, well, not only will we be playing bishop g4 to actually just pick this knight off, but yeah, this pawn is getting close to promoting. And if white takes this, then this rook will swing into g3, and white cannot keep the queen, conveniently defending the pawn and the knight anymore. If we go here, this is quite powerful. Yeah, the queen has to go away from the defense of, or yeah, well, what is the? I mean, the engine is just saying this is like the engine was giving some pretty big numbers here, so I'm going to turn it on just briefly. But you got like queen c2. Yeah, this, and then if you come back with your queen, okay, then we can just take on f5. Yeah, because if you take, it's a checkmate. So I mean, basically the point is white is completely tied up here. So yeah, maybe not obvious to appreciate at first, but I definitely can see it now, how paralyzed white is. But yeah, this would have ended the game on the spot without any unnecessary drama. But again, in the game, I thought there was no problem with queen takes f4. So this actually is a big mistake that actually gives white an amazing chance to get back in the game. He didn't really have a lot of time on his clock here to figure things out. So luckily for me, he just blitzed out bishop takes g7, which once again goes back to completely winning for black. So now I'm just up 2 pawns. But this is actually quite incredible. So the game could have been very interesting if he had found rook h1. This actually creates a very nasty threat, queen h3. When I'm going to have a very hard time defending against queen takes h7 checkmate. In fact, even if, like, let's say I make some random move, queen h3, even if I play h5, white can sacrifice the queen here. and I'm getting checkmated. I can't block. I have to do this, and I get checkmated. So, I mean, yeah, in this case, I would have to take this actually and sacrifice my queen for the rook. And then of course this should be winning for white. So, yeah, for rook h1, I would actually have to play h5 here. I don't actually have any better defenses. And now rook h4. This is quite incredible. This queen is getting boxed in. Like all these squares are covered. I have to retreat to h6. And now this is amazingly how this whole line is pretty much forced. After knight e3, white's intention is to play knight g4 and trap this queen on h7, and then just kind of leave this weird configuration of pieces here, and the major pieces all boxed up on the king side, to have this crazy compensation. So the engine's main line of the engine here is the quite incredible sequence. Rook e8, knight g4, queen has to go to h7, and now queen d2, the idea of knight h6. So the engine plays bishop takes f5 here. After knight h6, bishop takes e4 check, with the idea rook takes e4 g5. So now suddenly uncovering this, and threatening the knight. But white doesn't take the bishop, white just plays king c1. And now like after bishop f5, this is quite an incredible position. I haven't seen a position like this in quite some time actually. These two pieces are actually completely paralyzing my queen, rook, and king. If you look at my queen, rook, and king here, they literally have no moves. I can't play king g8 because of the knight. I can't move the rook because it's pinned. My queen has no squares. I can't move anywhere. But I also can't target this bishop. I have no way of attacking this bishop. It's like white can just leave these pieces here. Even if I play g5, like white can just play queen takes g5, or rook takes h5, and like I can't do anything. So I am up the exchange and 4 pawns here. So I'm up 6 points of material, which is incredible. But actually the engine thinks that white is slightly better here. So I think it wants to play like c5 or something. So yeah, I mean, this would have been quite an incredible, hilarious position to play. And we both, I'm sure, we both would have been in pretty big time trouble at this point. So this, who knows what would have happened here. This is complete chaos. But yeah, probably, I mean, I would definitely take white here just because of how paralyzed black is. But this would have been a very interesting position, to say the least. Okay, luckily for me, he just kind of blitzed out bishop takes g7. Okay, now black is completely winning again, and I was able to convert this fairly smoothly. Takes g7. Okay, his idea was to play rook f1 and then get this pawn to f6, but it's not really as scary as it looks. Gets the pawn to f6, but I play king h8. And now this g pawn. I've seen in advance that this pawn is going to decide the game pretty easily. Once it gets to g4, I can even play rook g6 and start picking this guy up. And white simply cannot drum up any serious threats. So okay, the game ended. A few more moves, knight e3, g5, c5, g4. This is actually very important. After takes, if he plays knight c4, it's very important that after bishop b5, knight takes d6, I take the queen with check. Otherwise, knight takes f7 is actually checkmate. Sorry, just kind of a minor detail. How, yeah, even the smallest of things like that, like if this king was on a1, then in this position white would be close to winning, actually, because knight takes f7 would be a pretty massive threat. I don't even know, I have to play bishop e8 or something. And then white could maybe play queen b5, I don't know. Okay, either way, yeah, I'd calculated in advance that I didn't have to worry about that because the queen is hanging with check. So instead he played knight g2, but now queen h3, and after queen e2 I played bishop b5 just to simplify the position. Queen takes g2, and okay, queen d2, a few more moves, I play g3. It's pretty clear this pawn is going forward, and there's simply no threats. Queen takes h7, I can always take, and my queen can come back easily enough to defend if I need to. So yeah, my opponent threw in the towel here. So yeah, I think this King's Indian is pretty interesting as an opening. Definitely you're always guaranteed to get some fun positions. It was kind of nice to play this bishop f6, bishop h4 idea over the board. And it was also kind of fun to see my opponent's reaction. He was completely shocked, like he couldn't believe his eyes when he saw me play bishop f6. So well, I mean, it's kind of maybe a bit hard to tell what his facial expression was, but he definitely looked a little bit surprised. So it was kind of fun to play something offbeat like that. That's actually fairly reasonable. This is not like a bad idea for black. So alright, that's going to do it for this video. Maybe if I play some more interesting games in the future, we'll analyze those too. But alright, for now, yeah, until next time.